Hello, everyone. My name is Shane Forgerson. I am an educator and aspiring administrator working on taking the CPACE. This is going to be my second video on the CPACE performance study guide and walkthrough. This one is on the school leadership portion of the CPACE. Again, this exam is 4 hours long. You want to make sure that you pace yourself and spend half the exam doing the instructional leadership, which I have a video on that as well, and half the exam during doing the school leadership portion of the exam. This is going to be a comprehensive study guide and walkthrough for my own study purposes, but I hope that you find this video helpful in your studies if you are taking the CPACE. Let's jump into it. School leadership assignment. So this comes from the example test from the CTCE website. And this is going to look very similar to what the actual CPACE test will look like when you take it in person. The school is obviously going to be a different school. They're not going to use the same school, but the framing of the questions are going to be the same. And the way that the data is laid out and what they're going to ask you to do in the CPACE is going to be very, very similar. So this states, based on your review of the overview of King Street High School and of the supporting documentation and artifacts, including selected student demographic data, accountability data, standards-based test data, faculty data, survey data, and communications, as well as your understanding of the California Administrative Performance Expectations, respond to the following questions. Your response should analyze and synthesize information contained within the documentation and artifacts, rather than simply restate this information. You should also cite specific evidence from the documentation and artifacts to support your point of view. So what's going to happen is you're going to be given a bunch of documents that are all going to be about a single school. You're going to have to comb through that data and you're going to have to find strengths and you're also going to have to find weaknesses. And then you're going to have to come up with a game plan to address those weaknesses. So this is a lot of words to talk about how you're going to be analyzing data and you're going to be taking that analysis and being able to synthesize that into a clear response that talks about, as a principal, how would you find strengths in a school and find weaknesses in a school that you can then address and formulate a plan to improve the school. Making sure throughout this process that you're citing specific evidence from the documentation and the artifacts. This portion of the CPACE is going to be very heavy with the citations and with the references to documentations. So every chance that you get, every claim that you make needs to be cited and supported by some sort of evidence. So I've included a flow chart that helps me organize my thoughts when I'm working through the school leadership portion of the CPACE. And this can be broken down into three separate sections: the discovery section, the planning section, and the monitoring section. Under discovery, you're going to need to find two issues that are found within the documents and are backed by data. And those are issues that you can use to talk about would you improve the school. So, for the first issue, I always like to look at the memo first because you will typically find within the memo some sort of concern that whoever has written the memo is concerned about and would like to be addressed by the new principal. So the memo is going to be written to the new principal, which is you coming into the school, and it's going to be talking a little bit about the school, and it's going to be talking about maybe some strengths and maybe some weaknesses that they would like to be addressed by the new principal. It's not always a guarantee that you're going to find an issue within the memo, but it's always good to start with the memo so you can get an idea from someone who works at the school or works with the school about how the school is poised to improve and what improvements they would like to see be addressed by the new principal. When you find this issue in the memo, if you find this issue in the memo, you want that issue to be backed by data in two or more documents. So don't just take the word of the memo and use that. You also want to cite the documents and you need to talk about the actual data from the documents and how those coincide with the issue found in the memo. Your second issue is going to be found somewhere within the documentation, and it's going to be possibly in the perception data. So, what I like to look at are the surveys, and I like to see what the teachers and students and parents are talking about. And if there's like a single thread that aligns within that perception data that everybody is talking about, it's likely that that's also going to be found somewhere in other data, whether that be test scores or suspension rates. So, for instance, if everyone is talking about how the math instruction is unsatisfactory at the school, you'll probably see within the test score data that there's lower test scores within the school compared to the district average, or you'll see that the test scores have slowly been going down over time in math instruction. So you want to look for the perception data, usually some sort of surveys, and you want to look for those common threads. So for issue number one, the quickest way to find first issue is to look to the memo and then look to the data to see, okay, is that issue backed by some sort of data that I can find? And then the second issue can typically be found in the perception. So, what is everybody talking about within the school that they think could use improvement? And then can I find data that backs up those claims? And that's the quickest way to sort of jump into finding two issues right away that are strongly supported by data throughout the documents that you can actually answer on in the discovery portion of the CPACE. So let's move on to the plan portion. For the plan portion, once you've found your issues, number one and two, you're going to have to formulate a plan to address those issues. And you can think about the acronym GSDP, which stands for Goal, Stakeholders, Data, and Plan, to help you sort of put your thoughts together on how you would formulate a plan to address the two issues. So it could be something like this. To address the first issue, I would create a plan to improve blank by better understanding how blank is impacting blank. So, if it were math test scores, for instance, then that is going to be the thing that you are improving. So, I would create a plan to improve math test scores by better understanding how, well, what affects math test scores? It's probably math instruction, or maybe it's math curriculum. So you could talk about to address the first issue, I would create a plan to improve math test scores by better understanding how math instruction is impacting student learning in math. So you want to always connect everything to student learning and achievement. So the complete goal could be to address the first issue. I would create a plan to improve math test scores by better understanding how math instruction is impacting student achievement in math. So then you have those three elements. You have math test scores. You have what are you going to understand that is affecting math test scores? Well, it's going to be the instruction. And how is that instruction impacting student learning and achievement in math? Then, when you have that goal, you're going to talk about which stakeholders are involved in improving the math test scores. So, you talk about, I would assemble a team of stakeholders, including it could be math teachers, it could be district math specialists, it could be other administrators, it could be school site council, it could be PTSA, and that would be able to disaggregate data from math test scores and determine whether math instruction is impacting the math test scores. So you want to make sure that everything that you do on the CPACE School Leadership portion of the exam is team based. You want to collaborate with everyone else on campus to figure out how you can address this issue. And you don't want to approach it from, I would do X, Y, and Z all by myself. As a leader, it's important that you are leading teams. Your purpose is to be the leader of a team to address issues. So you want to make sure that you talk about assembling a team of stakeholders. I would assemble a team of stakeholders, including math teachers, uh, math team leads, district math specialists, school site councils that would be able to disaggregate data from math test scores and determine whether math instruction is leading to low math test scores. So you want to talk about the data. What data would they review and why? Would they review the math test scores? Would they review the math curriculum? Would other administrators review data from teacher evaluations to determine if there are certain teachers that need growth plans to help them improve in their math instruction? What sort of data would you review and why? And then your plan. If it is determined that math instruction is having a negative impact on student learning and achievement, my team and I would blank. And this is your plan portion of it. My team and I would formulate a plan to improve math instruction by doing X, Y, and Z. So you want to make sure that your plan is informed by the data and it is collaborative and team based. And then you want to make sure that whatever plan you lay out that you and your team would do, that this would positively impact student learning by. So if you formulated a plan to help teachers improve their math instruction in the classroom, you need to state this would positively impact student learning by having improved math instruction in the classroom, which would create better outcomes for students in math classes. So finally, once you've put a plan into place, you need to have a plan to monitor. So just because you've implemented some sort of changes that are going to help improve specific aspects of your school, you need to make sure that you have a plan to monitor those changes so that you can see if your plan is actually working. So each progress indicator needs a process monitor. So what this means is that if you have, if you are trying to improve math instruction, for instance, and you have some sort of test scores that would indicate whether or not math instruction is being improved, you need to be able to look at those test scores and monitor whether or not those test scores are being improved. Or if you are helping certain teachers with their teaching and improving their teaching in the classroom, you need to be doing observations. You need to be doing walkthroughs. You need to see how students are learning in the classroom and if uh, their learning and achievement is actually improving in the classroom. So if you plan for it, you have to monitor it. So whatever your plan is that you put in place, you have to make sure that you monitor it. And you're going to use the same data points as the discovery. So when you discovered in the data, let's say you discovered that math test scores were gradually going down year by year, and that's one of your data points, then you're going to use that as one of your monitoring points. So you say that I discovered this in the data here, and I'm going to monitor it in the data to see if those things are going to be improving over the next X amount of years. So let's say like over the next 3 years, I'll be monitoring the test scores of math test scores to make sure that they are improving over time. And for instance, if you found that in the survey data that parents and teachers and students were all agreeing that math instruction was an issue, what you're going to do is you're going to make sure that you monitor that. So then you can say, I will create a survey to monitor perception data on whether or not math instruction is improving over this period of time. So that could also be the same period of time. So over the next 3 years, I'll be monitoring perception data to make sure that math instruction is improving. And if you found that there were specific teachers, math teachers, for instance, that had teacher evaluations that were lower in math teaching, then you can figure out, okay, well then I'm going to monitor the teacher evaluations over the next few years to make sure that those teachers are improving in math instruction. So make sure that whatever you plan, that you connect that plan to monitoring the data of the things that you found in the discovery, and you use those same data points in the future to see that those things are improving. Then let's talk about communicating. You're going to use your team to communicate changes. You want to communicate changes to effective stakeholders, teachers, staff, students, and parents. And you want to use community committees such as SSC, SSAC, ELAC, PAC, etc. So in this part of the CPACE, when you communicate, you want to make sure that you use discernment and you communicate certain things to certain people and that you use your team in those communications. So it's not just you communicating everything, but you can talk about certain stakeholders or certain committees that would talk about certain things to certain other parties within the school. And what you're going to do is you're going to make sure that those communications are very specific to the effective parties. So if it's students, you would communicate changes in instruction, in math instruction, by having school newsletters talking about math instruction and the changes to the curriculum that you would make. Or you would have, during parent-student conferences, you would have teachers talk about how they've implemented this new curriculum and how it's been affecting their student in the classroom. Just different aspects of your improvement plan and how you would communicate it to all the different parties that are involved. So let's jump into the CPACE school leadership assignment example, and let's break it down section by section and question by question and figure out how we're going to answer this thing. So the CPACE school leadership assignment is going to be broken down into 3 subsections. The first one will be identifying school accomplishments and needs. Number 2 is school improvement, instructional and organizational leadership. And number 3 is monitoring the improvement plan. And I'm going to go through how you will be graded on each one of those sections. And then we're also going to talk about every single question that you're going to be asked in each one of those sections and how they recommend, by the strong sample response, how they recommend that you would answer those questions. Identifying school accomplishments and needs, grading criteria. You will be graded on the following criteria: identifying 2 appropriate strengths of the school, identifying and describing in detail 2 appropriate issues of the school that negatively impact instruction and student learning. Identifying school accomplishments and needs, question 1. The question says, what are 2 school strengths at King Street High School? So you're going to want to answer this in about 7 sentences, and you're going to want to think about common strengths that could be at a school. So it could be slated for continued success. If you see within the documents, there's a bunch of different places where you think that the school is set up for success in the future, whether that's improved test scores, whether that's the teachers are highly rated, that they are somewhere in their career where they can continue with the school. There's a lot of parent involvement. There's a lot of different aspects of the school that have built maybe school site councils that are going to help the school improve. If you're seeing different things in the documents that you can connect together that show that the school is poised to be able to improve in the future, then that can be a common strength. You can look at improved AP passing rates, improved math EL science test scores, improved ELL, SPED, or subgroup proficiency, strong family engagement, positive school culture, lower suspension and attendance rates, high performing staff. All of these things can be a strength of the school, or you can find a single thing that is a strength and talk about that, or you can combine them and say continued or slated for continued success. Some sentence frames that you can use are simply one school strength is, and then talk about the school strength, and another school strength is, and then talk about the school strength. But after you talk about the strengths, and this is why it's 7 sentences long, which seems pretty long, is that all of these need to be data driven. So once you make the claim, you have to back it up from data from the documents. So any claim that you make within the CPACE school leadership portion has to be backed up by evidence from the documents. So some examples of that could be while the school has a higher percentage of blank students compared to the district, these students have outperformed the district average in blank. So if you're talking about SPED or some sort of subgroup, you can talk about the proficiency of that subgroup in that school. And while they have a higher percentage of those students, the school does a great job of helping those students perform, and that's shown by this data. Another one could be this is reinforced in the blank data, which shows dot, dot, dot. So you could talk about the data of the suspension rates. This is reinforced in the suspension rate data, which shows that the school has lowered suspension rates. Maybe they had a high suspension rate at a certain point, and then the suspension rates have gone down. So you can show that it's reinforced in the suspension rate data, which shows that the school has improved on suspension rates and will likely continue to improve in that manner. You can also say this is shown strong data may be correlated to the fact that, so you could say strong test score data may be correlated to the fact that the school has improved in their instruction on science or something to that manner. So make sure that any claim that you make is actually supported in the data. So here's the CTCE strong sample response for the question of what are two school strengths at King Street High School? It says, one strength of King Street High School is that over the past 3 years, ELA and math scores have improved. ELA proficiency is up 7% overall, with only English learners showing declining scores. Exhibit 3. Math proficiency, while still below district levels, overall has improved 6%. Exhibit 3. A second strength is that the school is poised to continue improving. The school plant has undergone renovations. Small learning communities, SLCs, have been created to improve student engagement in learning and connections to teachers. And staffing is stable, with teachers largely mid career and rated either proficient or distinguished. Exhibit 4. Also, student suspensions are down dramatically over 3 years from 14.3% to 4.8% overall, with similar reductions for all subgroups. Exhibit 1. 78% of students, 74% of parents, and 93% of teachers rate the school good or excellent. Exhibit 5. So notice how the answer to this question is backed by data. The strength is stated, and then the claim is reinforced by specifics from the documents. The first strength is centered around test scores, and the second is positioning for overall school improvement. So it's okay to combine different aspects of the school that are positive aspects to create an overall picture that the school is headed in the right direction. But also make sure that if you're going to do that in your answer, that you are adding specifics from the documents and you're citing everything. This portion of the CPACE is very document and site heavy. So make sure that you're referencing everything when you are making a claim. Identifying school accomplishments and needs, question number 2. The question states, what are two issues that negatively impact instruction and student learning? So you're going to want to answer this question in about 13 sentences. This is going to be a really long portion of your exam. You're going to think about common issues that can be negatively impacting instruction and student learning. So these can be things like declining math, ELA, science achievement scores. They could be declining ELL, SPED, or some other subgroup proficiency. It can be weak family engagement, weak school culture. It could be higher suspension rates or lower attendance rates. It could be lower performing staff. You're going to use sentence frames such as an issue that negatively impacts student learning is, a second issue is related to, and then you're going to always end this answer with, as the new principal, it is my job to address these issues. You want to make sure that these things are always data driven and are found within the data. So you want to look at all the documents, you want to comb through them, make sure that you're looking at the memo, make sure that you're looking at the perception data, and that you are finding issues that are common throughout multiple documents. You typically want to have 3 documents per issue that all coincide with one another and back each other up in saying that these are actual issues that need to be addressed at the school. So, with your data driven response, you can say things like lags behind the overall school improvement of. So, if test scores are improving overall, but then you see that like math test scores are actually declining, you can say that math scores lag behind the overall school improvement of test scores. And that's shown with this data. English language arts test scores are going up, science scores are going up, and then math scores are actually going down. Furthermore, parents have expressed concern about. So, this is perception data. So, if you're talking about parents are concerned about the math instruction, so you can say that the math scores are overall lagging behind the school improvement of test scores. And furthermore, parents have expressed concern about math instruction in the classroom, and that's found in their perception data. And then compared to the district at large. So if you have math scores at the school are lower than the district as a whole, you can make that comparison, and that will be something found in the data. So always make sure that whatever issues you find that are negatively impacting instruction are found in 3 separate documents, and that those are all backed up by data, and you're going to cite all of that data in this answer, which is why this thing is going to be about 13 seconds 13 sentences long. I wish it were 13 seconds long. 13 sentences long. You're going to spend half the time, about 6 of those sentences, on issue number 1, and then 6 sentences on issue number 2. And you're always going to end, the last sentence is going to be, as the new principal, it is my job to address these issues. Let's take a look at the strong sample response provided by CTCE. The question is, what are 2 issues that negatively impact instruction and student learning? The answer is, an issue that negatively impacts student learning is the lagging test scores of ELs. In ELA, proficiency rates for ELs actually have declined over 3 years, from 22% proficient to 18% last year. Math proficiency has improved 2%, but lags behind the overall school improvement of 6%. EL proficiency is declining in History, Social Science, and Science, Exhibit 3. The redesignation rate of King Street is low compared to the district at large and is declining, Exhibit 1. Furthermore, parents have expressed concern about English language development, ELD, instruction, Exhibit 5, with only 40% rating the department as good or excellent. Of the 14 ELA and ELD teachers, 5 are rated unsatisfactory or basic, Exhibit 4. A second issue is concerned about student behavior and safety. Despite the dramatic reduction in suspensions, only 62% of students, 60% of parents, and 84% of teachers believe the school has a safe and supportive environment. Exhibit 5. Approximately 30% of parents and students believe that student behavior interferes with learning and discipline and is not handled fairly. It seems likely students have had little involvement in decisions regarding discipline and the learning environment. The School Site Advisory Council, SSAC, in their memo asks for continued academic improvement and says the rise in negative student behavior is increasingly a cause of concern. As the new principal, I am expected to address these issues. So notice how the answer to this question is backed by data, the issue is stated, and then the claim is reinforced by specifics from the documents. The first issue is centered around test scores, and the second is about student well-being. So, what's important to point out, as I stated earlier in my sort of flow chart that I laid out, one of these issues is found in the memo, and that's from the School Site Advisory Council in their memo. Asks for continued academic improvement and says the rise in negative student behavior is increasingly a cause of concern. So that's one issue that's found directly in the memo, but then was also supported by data. And that was supported by the suspension data, as well as it looks like survey data. So in two other documents, other than the memo, that the issue about student behavior and safety was backed up by actual data. So you have three documents total for the second issue. For the first issue, it's talking about lagging test scores of ELs, and that's found in all sorts of data. It's found from, looks like test scores, it's found from the teacher evaluations, and it's found from, it looks like probably parent and student surveys about the concern about English language development instruction, rating it only 40% good or excellent. So again, you can find, like I said in my flowchart, you can probably find the answers to what the two issues are going to be from the memo and from the survey. So these two things likely came out of just the survey, looking at the survey and finding, oh, it looks like parents and students are concerned about ELD instruction. And then trying to figure out, okay, is that backed up by data? Well, yeah, it looks like the test scores are declining. Looks like history, social science, and science proficiency is declining. And then you can back up that claim by two other documents. So something that you found in perception data is also backed by two other data points in other documents. And then the same thing with the memo. You look at the memo and you find that, okay, a rise in negative student behavior is a concern. So let's look at, do we have suspension rate data? Well, yeah, despite the dramatic reduction in suspensions, only 62% of students and 60% of parents believe that they have a safe and supportive environment. So suspensions are going down, but it looks like the SSAC says that there's a rise in negative student behavior. And then approximately 30% of parents and students believe that the student behavior interferes with learning and discipline. So you want to see lower numbers than that in concerns over discipline, and you want to see higher numbers in that the parents and teachers and students feel like they have a safe and supportive environment. So those all three of those things combined, the memo, as well as the suspension rates and the perception data combined, is helping you to find out that this is an issue that people are concerned about and something that I can address. And then you always want to make sure at the end of this section that you say, as the new principal, I am expected to address these issues. You need to talk about as if you are the actual acting principal at this school, and these are the things that you're going to address. And as the new principal, this is my duty. I'm expected to address these issues. So now let's move on to the subsection number 2, school improvement, instructional and organizational leadership. Here is the grading criteria for this section. And it's going to be the third and fourth things that you'll be graded on for the school leadership portion of the CPACE exam. And it says, number 3, describing an effective strategy to address each identified issue. And number 4, explaining how your improvement plan will promote improved student learning. So it's not just important to describe the effective strategy to address each issue, but it's important to explain how your plan will promote improved student learning. We always, always, always on the CPACE need to relate it back to student learning and achievement. If you do that, your answer is going to be so much stronger. And if you don't, it's almost a guaranteed fail if you do not relate everything to student learning and achievement. School improvement, instructional and organizational leadership, question 1. There's actually only one question to this section, and that's because this is your plan portion of your exam. So this is where you're going to come up with all your ideas on how you would address these issues, and it's going to be pretty much the bulk of your answer to this portion of the exam. So the question states, as principal, how would you address the two issues you have just described? You're going to answer this in about 20 sentences, 10 sentences for each one of the issues that you have. And this is a rough ballpark. If you have to use more or less, that's totally fine. It's not about the length of it, but it's about making sure that you answer each one thoroughly. So for this section, you want to think about common strategies that would address the issues that you brought up. You want to be super specific about those strategies and not just really general about it, but actually what plan would you put into action to address the issues? For each negative piece of data that you talked about, if that was perception data that you talked about, or if it were test score data, you have to have a corresponding strategy to address it. So make sure that you recall that data that you talked about earlier in your plan section of your answer, and use it to talk about how you would have a strategy to address it. Explain explicitly how your strategies improve teaching and learning. This is so important. So once you state a strategy that you would use, talk about how that would improve teaching and learning. Meet with and observe teachers working in affected areas. So this is really important. If you're going to talk about, I would improve math instruction at the school, you need to make sure that you're meeting with the teachers and you're observing them in the classroom. So that can be a part of your strategy, is to meet with math teachers, or meet, if it's elementary school, meet with gen ed teachers and observe them and figure out the instruction in the classroom, and work with them on helping you to formulate a plan. You need to check available data for trends in the area of need. So always look back to your data that you talked about and see if there are specific trends that can help you with your answer. Look at current school resource allocation and consider refocusing resources toward area of need. So you want to look at the resources that you have. Sometimes in the memo, it might talk about how you have a lot of technology. So you could talk about the use of technology. You could talk about specific types of resources that you have that could be like PTSA, for instance. So if you have a really involved PTSA, you could figure out how the PTSA might be able to support you in a specific area of need. Or if you have a great school site advisory committee, that you could use that. You want to frame questions and presentation of findings to stakeholders for discussion around the area of need. So you want to make sure that you are always setting up meetings with questions and presentations of your findings in those meetings to help have your stakeholders help you formulate plans for moving forward. You want to seek out what is working at the school as a model for addressing areas of need. So, if you have something, for instance, if your test scores are low in math, but then your ELA test scores are really high and everyone talks highly about your ELA instruction, you can actually pull from those resources and say, I would take a look at how ELA instruction has maybe improved over the years and what plans they have put in place to improve the instruction and the student achievement in ELA, and apply some of those same strategies to math. You want to use professional development and staff meetings. So if your focus at your school, every school is going to sort of have like a mission and a goal for every school year. And if your focus for that school year is math instruction, then you're going to want to make sure that your professional developments are all based around your math instruction. You're going to want to make sure that your staff meetings are focused on how math is improving, and talk about what's happening in the classroom, how the new curriculum has been helping math instruction, making sure to answer questions from teachers that are struggling maybe to adopt a new curriculum or to adopt new strategies. You want to use those staff meetings and you want to use your professional development opportunities to work on your goals. Make sure that you emphasize student voice within your answer. So, talk about how students are going to be involved in this. Don't just talk about how all the teachers and all the administrators and the staff are going to put together a plan, and that plan is going to be so awesome for the students and they're just going to love it. Talk about how the students actually have a voice and involvement in this. So, are they a part of the SSAC? Are they part of like a PTSA? Are they involved in making decisions? Are they able to give feedback and any sort of meetings on how the new curriculum is affecting them, whether or not they like it? Are they able to help you decide these different instructional strategies that are helpful to them in the classroom and help to improve the school? Students are the biggest part of the school. They're the whole reason why we're here. So make sure that you look to the students to help you inform your plan. And last but not least, you this is coming directly from the question. It states underneath the question, think about school goals, available resources, who should be involved in the process, how and why they should be involved, and how your improvement plan will promote improved student learning. So everything that you need for the CPACE is actually baked into the questions and all the documents and everything that they give you. It's all there in the exam. All you need to do is look to the exam and be able to kind of decipher what they're asking you for and just pull that out from the data and pull that out from everything that you have. So it says, think about the school goals. So when we said school goals, we talked about professional development. We talked about staff meetings, the overall school goals of maybe the memo that you had, maybe the perception data. So you're thinking about what sort of goals the student had in place, or the school had in place prior to you coming in, and then you're talking about how we can use professional development and staff meetings and the different councils that we have to address those goals and to really be goal oriented. You can think about the available resources, like we said. Maybe you have a lot of technology that's new to the school that it could be used in helping to address this issue. You need to think about who can be involved in the process. So, what your team looks like, making sure that students are always a part of the team. But you can also draw from district resources if you have district math specialists, for instance, or if you have like a DLAC or something like that that you can draw from. You can also look for, and it says, how will your improvement plan promotes improved student learning? This is super, super important. Always, 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 if you talk about something that's a plan, if you plan for it, then you need to say, this specifically will help improve student learning by X, Y, and Z. Let's take a look at the strong sample response for the question. As principal, how would you address the two issues you have just described? So we're going to take a look at one issue at a time. This answer is going to be for issue number 1. To better understand how EL instruction is handled in ninth and 10th grades and in the SLCs, I need to meet with ELD teachers, observe classes, and investigate how much coordination and consultation is happening between ELD and ELA teachers and with the other academic departments. I also need to review teacher evaluations and better understand what supports are in place or may be accessible to help ELD teachers who are rated unsatisfactory or basic improve. Also, because they have expressed concern about the ELD program, it is important to meet with focus groups of ELs and parents to investigate their concerns. After collecting information, I would put together a plan to address the achievement gap for the ELs. I would start by assembling a team of committed stakeholders who are directly involved, including teachers, parents, and EL students. To maintain individual teacher and student privacy, the group should focus on using general data about effective ELD programs and instructional approaches to help develop the improvement plan. I would pay particular attention to suggestions the students might have, such as peer tutoring or other learning supports. Because achievement is improving, the school community should see these efforts as timely and appropriate and will embrace recommendations that come out of this process. So let's break this down into why this is a good answer, why this is a strong sample response. Well, first of all, notice how the plan begins by better understanding the issue, meeting with stakeholders, and investigating. So it's not just taking the issue at face value, it's digging a little bit deeper and trying to understand the issue and why it's happening. Is it coordination between departments? Is it the ELD instruction? Is it teachers that have uh, evaluations that are unsatisfactory or basic? Is it and digging deeper into meeting with parents and students who have concerns about the program and investigating those concerns and to finding out what their concerns are. So it's figuring out all the information before formulating a plan and making sure that you have extra data and not just relying on the data that was given to you in the documents, but doing your own investigation and collecting your own data. So, part of your plan should be to find what is causing the issue prior to addressing it. So, step one is collect more data, and then step two is to assemble a team. And within this team, make sure that there is discernment who is involved in what. The answer also mentions paying close attention to student suggestions and gives specific examples of what those might be. It ends with expressing how this plan would positively affect student learning with the phrase because achievement is improving. So, step one, collect more data and figure out what the root cause of the issue is. Step two, assemble a team of committed stakeholders who are directly involved in this issue. And it states that that would be teachers, parents, and EL students. So, creating a team of teachers, parents, and EL students to help address the issue head on, and making sure that when you assemble that team that you are using discernment in who has access to what data and what information you're sharing with who. So you're not sharing student achievement data with everybody, you're not sharing teacher evaluations with everybody. You're making sure that you're focusing on general data that is accessible to all, as we see in like some of the documents, like overall achievement data of the school and the effectiveness of ELD programs, and investigating into programs and instructional techniques and approaches that might help improve the EL instruction in the school as a whole. And then again, focusing on student voice, paying particular attention to suggestions that students might have, and giving some examples of what that might be instead of just stating, I would pay attention to student voice. Well, what does that mean? What would they possibly offer the team as suggestions? And that was as simple as they might offer peer tutoring or some other learning supports that they find to be helpful in the classroom. And then, of course, wrapping it all up with how does this affect student achievement? Because achievement is improving through this plan, the school community would see these efforts as timely and appropriate and would embrace recommendations. So it's not about putting together a plan that you're forcing upon everybody. It's putting together a plan that everybody can agree upon. This is something that we wanted at the school, and this is something that will help us, our students, achieve, and we can all adopt this as a team together. Let's take a look at part two, addressing the second issue. The second issue of concern is the conflict between reduced suspension rates and the perception that negative student behavior is impacting learning. This will require, first, a deeper investigation of the student suspension rate data. It is possible that a zero tolerance approach, in effect at the time, led to the 14.3% suspension rate 3 years ago, with much higher rates for African American students. Exhibit 1. The data show real improvement since then, but negative perceptions are lingering. To change the narrative, I would try to find the resources to move King Street toward a discipline support system based on practices and concepts reflective of a restorative justice approach, along with elements such as mental health support for students and response to intervention strategies. It is important to show the community and students that we are serious about developing a strongly supportive learning community for all. I would build support by initiating conversations with groups of families, students, and staff focused on building common understandings for student behavior. Questions to explore include: what stressors are affecting students? Is discipline punitive or seen as a chance for teaching and support? Are students invested in maintaining a safe learning environment? The next step would be to establish peer mediation and conflict resolution groups to empower students and keep them invested in their learning environment. I would also provide faculty and staff with professional development opportunities focused on building respect for diversity and equitable enforcement of discipline policies. So, notice how the plan begins by better understanding the issue and investigating the data. So it says a deeper investigation of the suspension rate data. It is possible that a zero tolerance approach in effect at the time led to the higher suspension rate. So possibly there was just a zero tolerance approach happening at the time. There was a really high suspension rate with much higher rates for African American students. So it's possible that that zero tolerance approach in effect at the time led to high suspension rates, and then they've just gotten rid of a zero tolerance approach. And so there hasn't been really an improvement in student behavior at all. It's just that they don't have a zero tolerance approach to suspensions anymore. That's a high possibility. So the data show real improvement since then, but negative perceptions are lingering. And to change the narrative, they would try to find the resources to move toward a discipline support system based on practices of restorative justice and elements of mental health supports. So this is all sort of best practices. Um, Now in education is restorative justice and mental health support and response to intervention strategies. And it's important to show the community and students that we are serious about developing a strongly supportive learning community for all. So, this is the aspect of the answer where they're talking about how this would affect student learning and achievement, is to showing that the students and the community that the school is serious about developing strongly supportive learning communities. And the team building or the collaborative aspect of this answer, or the one where it's assembling a team, is the part where it talks about I would build support by initiating conversations with groups of families, students, and staff focused on building common understandings for student behavior. So, trying to find those family, students, and staff who are focused on wanting to build a common understanding for student behavior and wanting to figure out how to solve this problem together. And asking them questions like what stressors are affecting students, and is discipline punitive, or is it a chance for teaching and support? And then are students invested in maintaining a safe learning environment and figuring out the answers to those questions? Then the next step would be to establish groups. So again, focusing on the collaborative part of things, and the part where it's involving students and student voice. So establishing groups for peer mediation and conflict resolution to empower students and keep them invested in their learning environment. And then it ends with providing faculty and staff with professional development opportunities focused on building respect and diversity and equitable enforcement of discipline policies. So, again, this part that we talked about where you can mention the focus of the school, and that you can use your PLCs or your professional developments in order to address that focus and that issue. So, again, making sure that step one is collecting data, and then step two is assembling a team of some sort. So you can collect extra data and then talk about that extra data and then talk about who is going to be involved in helping you to solve this issue. That's where you're assembling a team. And make sure that the answer details specific questions that would be helpful in the conversations that you have with these teams of people, if that is applicable. Like in this case, where you're asking people specific question, or you're asking a group of people questions, make sure that you are specific on those questions. And then always make sure that you relate it back to students achieving in your school and how this will affect student achievement. Moving on to the third and final section of the CPACE School Leadership portion of the exam. Monitoring the improvement plan. Here's the grading criteria for this section, and it's numbers 5, 6, 7, and 8 of what you will be graded on overall in your exam. Number 5, identifying specific indicators of progress, demonstrating that your plan is producing the intended results. Number 6, describing a process to be used to monitor improvements and learner outcomes. Number 7, describing participant involvement in the progress monitoring process. Number 8, describing an effective strategy to communicate progress to the larger school community. So for monitoring the improvement plan, I've put all the questions into one slide on purpose because the answer to these questions is sort of all going to be baked together in one cohesive response, with a couple paragraphs for each one of the issues that you address. So let's take a look at the questions. What specific indicators of progress would demonstrate that your plans are producing the intended results? What process would you use to monitor improvements in instruction and student learning outcomes? Who would be involved in the progress monitoring process? How and why would they be involved? How would you communicate progress to the larger school community? Example, parents and guardians, community members. So you can answer this in about 16 sentences, which is 2 paragraphs per issue that you have. So for this, you can think about the data. You really want to make sure that the data that you talked about in your planning stage and in your discovery stage are all tied into your monitoring stage. So, how did you discover that there was an issue? What sort of data did you look at? And then, how did you use that data to plan to address these issues? And now, how are you going to use those same data points to monitor the improvement of your school from the plan that you created? So, you're going to revisit the same data points for gains. And every progress indicator needs a process to monitor. So anything that can indicate progress or anything that can indicate growth within your school needs a process to be able to monitor that. You're going to develop benchmarks to present to stakeholders. You can meet with stakeholders and use specific timeframes. So you could say, like, I could have a monthly SSAC meeting for at least 2 to 3 years that's going to follow up on the improvement of school behavior. And you're going to follow up with the affected teachers to assess progress and provide further resources. So, any teachers that are involved, if it's EL teachers, then you want to follow up with those teachers and assess how things are going in their classroom and provide any further resources that they might need. Your plan should not be principal centered. So, it shouldn't be, I would do this or I would do that, but more about my team. So, what would your team do, and how would your team discuss the progress that's happening, and how would your team monitor the progress that's happening? And your communication to the community should be targeted and strategic. So you're not just going to share everything with everybody. You're not going to say, I would share the teacher evaluations with the community at large. You're going to make sure that it's targeted to specifically to the stakeholders that would be involved in making this decisions and who should know what type of information. So you can say, I will communicate this information to these stakeholders in this way using this strategy because. So do not communicate everything to everyone. You're going to want to show discernment with the type of information that you are communicating to the community. Let's take a look at the strong sample response for monitoring the improvement plan. It states, to monitor improved EL learning, my administrative staff and I will need to conduct follow-up observations of ALD instruction. These observations will document the effectiveness of and/or continuing need for teacher improvement plans and improvements in instruction for ELs. Also, the committee's recommendations will be reviewed and shared, and a timeline for implementation will be developed and monitored. Results can be tracked by subsequent test scores, but classroom progress can be monitored through teachers' formative assessments. Follow up focus groups with students can obtain their views regarding improved instructional practices and the progress they are making. EL instruction should be a focus for faculty and department meetings, with teachers sharing best practices. Any district specialists or master teachers in this area could be presenters and perhaps mentors to King Street teachers. Faculty and staff should also continue to encourage student involvement in ELD teaching and learning. I would share results with the community through focused communication on changes in classroom instruction, new instructional materials, and suggestions for helping students at home. This will raise awareness of the school's focus on EL instruction and engage stakeholders, including parents and students, in the initiative. So let's break this down a little bit. Notice how the monitoring begins right away with who will be involved and what they will be doing. And it says, quote, "My administrative staff and I will conduct follow-up observations." Then it discusses what the purpose of that monitoring will be. Notice how observations are meant to address the data point of unsatisfactory or basic teacher evaluations that the test taker found in the data during their discovery phase and used throughout their planning phase as well. And now they are including it in the monitoring phase. So that thread of data across all three phases of the answer is super important. The answer goes on to talk about the committee involved, so another party involved, tracking test scores and real time formative assessments. So, how will things be tracked? Again, those same data points, the test scores. The test scores will be tracked over time. Communication is in the form of faculty department meetings, district specialists as presenters, encouraging student involvement, sharing with the school community through communication on changes in classroom instruction, material suggestions, and finally ends with how this will raise awareness of the school's focus and engage stakeholders. So this can be a little bit tricky. And I know me in particular, when I've taken the CPACE in the past, I've thought about communication as in like it has to be something that you are directly telling people, oh, hey, look, we did these things, and then this was the result of that. But the communication can actually be it's about being throughout the process. So having a focus on faculty and department meetings, EL instruction being the focus for faculty and department meetings, you are communicating the changes that you are making during those meetings. That is a form of communication. Having district specialists or master teachers in the area presenting and being mentors, that is a form of communication. They are communicating on best practices, and they are doing that for your teachers' benefits. Faculty and staff continuing to encourage student involvement in ELD teaching and learning. That's a form of communication. The faculty and staff are communicating with the students on the importance of their learning and their involvement in their learning, and they're encouraging their students through that communication. And then at the end, it's how would I would share results with the community through focused communication on changes in classroom instruction, new instructional materials, and suggestions for helping students at home. So this is the part that you would think of. Your intuition would be, oh, this the communication part's just going to be this. It's going to be, oh, I'm just going to share with the community on what we're doing in the classroom. But it's actually the larger communication as a whole. How is everybody involved in this plan communicating with all other stakeholders involved, and what does that look like throughout the entire process, not just what happens at the end after the changes have already been made in the classroom and you want people to know about that. And it ends with, this will raise awareness of the school's focus on EL instruction and engage stakeholders, including parents and students, in the initiative. So this is about making the community, the learning community as a whole, aware of your focus as a school. And what does that look like in every single step of the process? What does that look like for your staff and your faculty members? Well, that's probably department meetings, and maybe that's professional development. And maybe that's involving district specialists and master teachers that come in. What does that mean? What does the communication mean for students? Well, that means that staff members and faculty are encouraging their involvement in their learning and in ELD teaching, and making sure that they are sharing their perspective throughout this process. And then finally, it's the school community and making sure that the school community knows what's going on in the classroom, the instructional materials that are changing, improvements that you're making, and suggestions for, hey, here's how you could help your kids at home with all this new stuff that we are implementing. So raising general awareness of what the school is focusing on is what the communication is all about. Monitoring is all about connecting to the data that's been a single thread throughout your entire answer to this portion of the exam, and then communicating is every single step along the way and every stakeholder that's involved. How is everybody talking and communicating amongst each other, and how does the learning community as a whole know about your school's focus? So here's part 2 of monitoring the improvement plan. And the strong sample response states, to monitor progress on the new student support system, I would hold regular meetings over at least 2 years with a committee representing students, staff, families, and administrators. These meetings would be a means to track the extent to which restorative justice concepts, RTI strategies, and other pilot efforts are being absorbed into the school's culture. I will need to monitor disaggregated discipline data in case suspensions begin to climb again, especially for previously affected student groups. I would also seek to hire a coordinator for the program who would report directly to me. New parent, student, and faculty perception surveys should be conducted each year to see if perceptions of the environment are improving. Discussions at the SSAC will also be helpful. All interested stakeholders must have the opportunity for input. My goal would be for the SSAC to become a partner in this effort, working with the administration to nurture the program and communicate its successes to the school community. So again, the monitoring plan begins by stating who would be involved, how they would be involved, and what the time frame looks like. So it says that I would hold regular meetings over at least 2 years with a committee representing students, staff, families, and administrators. So there would be a committee of people who would be involved in regular meetings to monitor the progress, and it talks about doing that for 2 years. Then the communication is simply who is communicating with who throughout the entire process, and how can the community as a whole understand the goals of the school? The answer also makes sure to connect to the data that has been a single thread throughout the essay. So, again, connecting all the data points from the discovery phase to the planning phase to the monitoring phase. All of the data needs to be connected in each one of these things. So it says, I will need to monitor disaggregated discipline data in case suspensions begin to climb again, especially for previously affected groups. So it talked about African American groups being disproportionately affected by suspension rates in the past. So looking out for um, those specific subgroups of students and making sure that you're monitoring the discipline data for that. I would also seek to hire a coordinator for the program who would report directly to me. So this is an interesting concept in this case. If a school has the resources to hire a coordinator, that's an incredible thing to have, so that they can coordinate the efforts for you, and you can report to them. They can report to you, and you can work on the problem together. So it's involving as many parties as possible to build a strong team to help your plan succeed. And then it talks about the perception surveys. So the perception surveys was something in the discovery phase that was noted, that in the perception surveys found that students and parents and teachers were not happy about the behavior in the school and the commitment to positive behavior outcomes. So this is something that needs to be, these perception surveys need to be conducted on a yearly basis so that you can figure out if those are improving. Are perceptions at the school improving or not? And the discussions at the SSAC will also be helpful. So this is discussions, this is a communication piece. how will things be communicated? There's going to be discussions at the SSAC. There's going to be regular meetings over 2 years. There's possibly going to be a coordinator that's having discussions, and all interested stakeholders have an opportunity for input. And then the goal is that the SSAC becomes a partner in the effort, working with the administration to nurture the program and communicate its successes to the school community. So relying on your team to be able to communicate with the school community. Congratulations, you made it to the end of me talking for a whole hour about the CPACE school leadership portion of the exam. I hope that this was helpful to you. Just remember to relax and to take deep breaths during the exam. It is challenging. I'm not going to pretend that it's not challenging. I've personally taken it 3 times and I've failed every single time. I will say I've passed either one or the other half of the exam, which is exactly why I'm making these videos, is specifically to help myself pass the exam. And just going through all of this information in these videos has made me feel really confident about taking the exam again. So I hope that it has the same effect on you, going through all this information and making sure that you go into it with a game plan. And the game plan is going to be for this portion of the exam to make sure that everything is data driven and everything is always about student learning and achievement, and that you have that data that's a single thread throughout your entire answer. If you follow these steps that are laid out in this video, I have confidence that you're able to do this. Likely you're an educator or a teacher. You have all the skills, you know what happens inside of a school, and you know what happens inside of classrooms. So you already know what you need and all of the knowledge going into this. You just need to put on sort of your leadership hat and know that this is about team building, and it's about discovering information, creating plans to use that information and that data to help students and teachers and staff members approve across the learning community, and then making sure that you're just monitoring the growth and you're communicating with all stakeholders involved throughout the entire process. That is the basic building blocks of this portion of the exam. And if you follow those steps, you will do well. Remember, you got this.